because, I mean, let's leave your case out of this for a second, Matt, because I think it's not fair here. The majority of cases, well, I would say, trusting the law as I do in this situation, in 100% of cases where fathers are denied access to their children, it's because there's violence there, there's either...
But hang on, you can't say that.
Women, as we know, Amanda...
Blanket society issue at the moment, because that's completely separate. In the 1%
women can make up...
cases,
women, in some cases, it's true, but in other cases we know that women can make up domestic violence allegations and there's nothing that the father can do about it.
And that's wrong, and it's a failing in the law. But would you rather have that tiny percentage of women who are doing that, or would you rather have the children who are seriously protected when there's a violent father involved?
What these guys are after is parity in the law. They're no less a quality parent than often the mothers that are banning them from seeing their children. It cannot be healthy. In a world where more and more fathers are taking active hands-on care of their kids, it cannot be healthy to say to people that want to do that, you're not going near your children for him or for the children.
That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is you're not going near your children until you've proved that you're a fit father. And the moment they prove they're a fit father, then they gain more and more access. Just as you have, Matt, you're a living example of how the courts work. You now have unlimited access to your children, and once you were denied it.
Not because of the courts, in spite of the courts.
Because his wife
Because you did what most people did. You sat down, you worked it out with your wife.
Yeah, and we sat down eventually, and I'm blessed because she's a fantastic woman. I'm very lucky that we get on really well, and we've got 2 kids who are not going to
How would you change the law? I mean, what do you actually... Let's try and knuckle down here what you stand for. What are you actually trying to change in simple terms?
What we want to do in law, and apologies for the legalese, is to give children a right in law to see both parents and both grandparents, because the grandparents suffered the double heartbreak, the double heartbreak of seeing their children go through it, and them going through it. So we start from that point of view, a presumption of 50-50 parenting, which does not mean sawing the children in half. It means you start with the principle of equality. And the third thing we'd like to see introduced in this country is to open up the courts, as David Blunkett did yesterday. Open up the courts so the press can see what is going on, and we reveal back, pull back this omnipresent cloak of secrecy which suffocates the debate.
Tell me about this 50-50 concept, Matt.
Well, it's called equality. It shouldn't come as a radical concept to most people in this country.
How does it work, Matt?
You start off with the presumption that 50% of the workforce are women, for example. We've identified that a third of all childcare is provided by fathers. We know what the underlying social dynamics are, so why can't we start from the point of view that we start off with 50-50? Now, in the parent share plan, which we're proposing, and these proposals are contained in our blueprint for family law, which we published on Father's Day this year, you start with 50-50 starting point. That could be a 60-40 split. It could be 70-30 split. It could be 80-20. It's whatever the most practical arrangement is. But you start with a level playing field. You start with the principle of equality. Now, how radical an idea is that?
So that's equality between the mother and the father. So what you're putting first is the rights of the father and the mother in front of the rights of the children. We talk a lot about grandparents, but actually, shouldn't we just be focusing on what's best for that child? Isn't it best for them to be in a stable home? And how do you split a kid up? 50% in one place and 50% in another?
Many judges do it. Many judges have 4 homes, and nobody sees the bat and eyelid there.
That's very rare,
but the point is, my children, for example, they've got 3 homes. They've got mum's home, they've got nan's home, and they've got dad's home. They seem to co-provide, but I think kids are very, very adjustable. And I think we have to understand where we are now as a society, not where we were 10 or 20 years ago. We're talking about the child's best interest, which everybody has become a bit of a meaningless mantra. Because as we've already know...
How can you say that? It is the only mantra.
We have established already, and I've established this, that nobody's kept any records of the outcomes for children. So everybody's been saying to act in the child's best interest. Margaret Hodge is saying she's acting in the child's best interest. And she has no way of knowing.
How can we actually say that it's in the child's best interest, in Matt's case, for his kids to have gone through months and years of barely seeing a father who was desperate to see them and to be a loving father to him? It is an outrage, in my view. But let's cut to this 50-50 thing. Here's where I've got a slight problem with Fathers for Justice, because I agree there should be a presumption of equality. Unfortunately, the way that the law works in this country, if you have a presumption... I read Dame Elizabeth Butler-Sloss, who's obviously in charge of all this,
bless her.
your friend, but she made it clear that the problem with that is you have to have a priority. Is the priority going to be the children's welfare, or is it going to be a 50-50 presumption? Because presumption in law means that will be the law.
Let me be unequivocal about this. Parliament's intention in the 1989 Children Act was that the child's best interest was best served by them retaining the love and care of both parents. That's what the child's best interest principle was supposed to be. That's what was supposed to happen. That isn't what happened. That's why I've seen the emergence of groups like Fathers for Justice.
One of the biggest problems, it seems to me, is how you actually enforce the law. Even if you were to get more changes, it seems the biggest disgrace in all this is these contact orders, where women who have got the kids at home and have been difficult about access to children, where the courts have assessed that the father's perfectly entitled to see his kids, he's not at risk or anything. And they issue contact orders ordering those women to allow the access. In sometimes like half the cases, 2 years ago, it was simply ignored by the women with impunity because they know, and we all know, that if it goes to court, they're not going to get jailed. What do we do about contact orders when they're getting ignored?
Jail mums.
Do you believe you can do that?
Well, we already do it. It's quite interesting that the double standard and hypocrisy in the Department for Education and Skills encouraged the prosecution last year of 7,500 parents of truanting children. And I think 12 of those mothers were sent to...
You don't
finish,
follow up one bad law with another one.
Well, let me just finish.
No, just let me interject for a second. Surely, in the interest of the child, sending a mum to prison is just not the answer.
Can I ask why we have this double standard then, where we send mum to prison for not sending little Johnny to school, but we don't send mum to prison for not sending little Johnny to go and see dad? What we'd like to see is a stepped up... Well, what we'd like to see is a stepped up range of tariffs, starting with community tagging. We'd like to see community service introduced. We'd like to see, simply, you can do it today. Quite frankly, if a judge wanted to, simply transfer residence from the mother to the father when you're faced with a recalcitrant parent.
It's also Amanda, we'll come back to this after the break, but it's also true, of course, that if it was the men restricting women from seeing it, they'd be all putting the slammer in about 10 seconds. Anyway, after the break, how far will Fathers for Justice go now to make their point?